Hey guys, I'm back again with more films that I watched in quarantine. Got a lot of movies I saw this month, so bear with me, this may be a little longer than usual. I started things off with rewatching Solo: A Star Wars Story, directed by Ron Howard. I like Ron Howard as a director, but this is by far some of his worst work. I don't really hate this movie, I just think that it's extremely average. There's nothing really worth talking about. It doesn't really introduce anything new that we didn't already know. Alden Ehrenreich, he doesn't really bring anything memorable to this role. I will never think of him as Han Solo. This movie was fun when it wanted to be, but nothing really sticks with you, so I feel like this movie serves no purpose beyond making money. I followed that up by rewatching The Social Network, directed by David Fincher. As you know, I didn't really like this movie on my initial watch, but I was really surprised that I actually love this movie now. It's flawlessly directed, the pacing is so fast that it feels magical. It's just the best example of modern day filmmaking. All of the performances are fantastic, the writing is amazing, and the direction is beautiful. One of my favorite movies of all time now. I then saw The Man Who Knew Too Much, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Hitchcock is one of the greatest directors to ever set foot in Hollywood, but I don't really believe this is one of his best movies. The one thing that really stayed in my mind throughout, though, was he actually did a very great job keeping his characters mysterious in this film. Also, Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day had some great chemistry in here. That ending was way too rushed, though. But I enjoyed this for the most part. The script felt a little bit convoluted, but I don't really think that's an entirely bad thing. It's just not Hitchcock's most memorable plot, in my opinion. Then I saw Dark Waters, directed by Todd Haynes, and it was something. I was expecting a much scarier, intense, and very powerful political thriller, and that's what I got for the most part, but it was mostly following the life of this lawyer instead of the actual events. It was one of the best acted movies of last year. Anne Hathaway stole nearly every scene she was in. Mark Ruffalo, Tim Robbins, Victor Garber, and Bill Pullman were all exceptional in this movie. I wish I saw a little more of Bill Pullman in this, but he was still really great. This is a very scary movie that I demand everyone to go watch now because it's addressing a chemical that's probably in everyone's system right now. They gotta show this movie in schools for real. This is extremely important to see. I followed that up by rewatching Singin' in the Rain, one of the best movies ever made. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably the most entertaining movie I've ever seen in my life. It's flowing with this undeniable energy and almost contagious joyfulness. It's impossible to watch this without having an ear-to-ear smile. It's amazing. I love every second of it. I then rewatched a similar movie that all of you may know of. It's called La La Land, directed by Damien Chazelle. This is a beautiful, beautiful film that I cannot praise enough. There's something so special about it. The personality shows so well. Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone give their best performances in my opinion. Especially Ryan Gosling. Oh my gosh, he's so good in this movie. I love every minute of this movie. Maybe cut like 10 minutes off, but that's okay. The themes are explored tremendously and the plot is just so interesting. I think that's why I love the movie so much. It's just such an interesting movie to watch. It keeps you invested in the characters very well. I think it's grown on me ever since I've seen it. Great movie. Please go watch this immediately. It's awesome. Then I saw Kill Bill, directed by Quentin Tarantino. I don't consider this one of the best Tarantino movies. While it looks amazing visually, it still has some pacing flaws, and I never found myself as interested in the other characters' storylines besides the bride's. Uma Thurman is amazing in this, maybe my favorite of her performances. She's just so darn likable in this. It's a good time, but I do think it dragged in a few parts. I followed that up with the original Star Wars trilogy. If you don't know this already, this trilogy may be the best trilogy of all time in my opinion. The first is praised, the second is worshipped, and the third is a great time. I loved every minute of watching this. This made me feel like a kid again, and I love the environment, and I love the characters in the environment. It's just so awesome. I started off with Star Wars, directed by George Lucas. The classic Star Wars is still very good. Hype can ruin a movie sometimes, but not with this. Though it may bore some people since it takes its time at the beginning, the world is still explored and gets unfolded in a really unique and interesting way. Every time I watch this, I try to forget everything I remember from it and try to look at it with fresh eyes, and man, this movie is just so great. Somewhere in my top 5 of all time, Star Wars really shows that you need a good script and good themes to really sell a movie. Sure, you can watch these and go like, these special effects are so cool, but that doesn't make the movie good. There's so much more to it than that, and this movie proves that fact. The way it unfolds all this new information that audiences in the 70s didn't understand is absolutely mind-blowing to me and very unique. You fall in love with these characters immediately, and even if the acting feels a little bit animated, it's just so likable. incredible. This is a film with a great story, great characters, fantastic world building, epic pacing, and brilliant special effects. I followed that up with The Empire Strikes Back, directed by Irvin Kershner. I believe this is the best Star Wars movie on a technical scale in every way, while the original still holds a special place in my heart as my favorite. I feel this to be the best one. Great set of characters, fantastic set pieces, and has some really profound themes. It always keeps the characters on edge and busy, which keeps the audience hooked and captivated throughout its runtime. It's a great update to the original classic by adding profound themes and darker material while having some hilarious comedy. What a great movie. Top 10 of all time for me. Then I ended the trilogy with Return of the Jedi, directed by Richard Marquand, and this film gets a lot of hate for being the black sheep of the original trilogy, but doesn't mean the movie's bad. Sure, it's not perfect, but it never once feels boring. The characters are obviously very likable at this point. All of their arcs are completed in a satisfying manner, and it's just a fun plot that may feel like it should have been a lot more dark, but it didn't really bother me. The scene between Darth Vader, the Emperor, and Luke was actually very deep and probably one of the best in the entire trilogy. I've always loved this as a kid, and though it's not as good as I remember it, it's still a great movie nonetheless. Great sequel, good movie, fantastic conclusion. I followed those movies up with a pretty low quality film, Hobbs and Shaw. It's dumb, it's stupid, but it's still fun when it wants to be. I'm not really talking about the action scenes because those actually dragged quite a bit and could be a bore at times. I'm talking about the chemistry between the two leads. That's what made this movie funny. The cameos were pretty fun too, but this movie did not know how to end at all. I was watching this with my family. We all looked at each other like, wait, what? But I guess it's still a fun movie nonetheless. Then I saw one of the most underrated Spielberg movies, Minority Report. I love this movie. Always keeping the characters doing something, it never felt too boring. Solid futuristic thriller. Spielberg once again makes an underrated flick next to Catch Me If You Can. Tom Cruise is great as always. The twists are believable. The world is lively, fun, and realistic. I had a great time with this film. Though I do feel the length at times, it still kept me on my feet. Then I had a Mel Gibson double feature with The Patriot, directed by Roland Emmerich, and Braveheart, directed by the one and only Mel Gibson. The Patriot was an awesome movie. It gets quite a bit of hate for not being historically accurate, and the critics aren't too kind to this movie either, but I think this film is still pretty intense. A lot more intense than I was thinking it to be. Surprisingly funny and entertaining war film that does follow some typical cliches at times, but never crosses the line. Sure, it can be overly sentimental at times, but that never bothered me enough to really downgrade it. Some of the humor is kind of tongue-in-cheek at times, but it still stands its purpose. With Mel Gibson being one of my favorite actors, it's surprising that I avoided watching this movie for so long. Then Braveheart was awesome as always. It's just one of my favorite movies of all time. I love this movie for a very long time. This movie is just so cool. It has one of my favorite scripts I've seen on film in a while. Mel Gibson is so delicious in this movie. It never wasted a single minute. Please go check this movie out. I followed those up with McFarland USA, a formulaic Disney sports drama. The editing in this was not really doing it for me, but it gets its fair share of, sunset silhouette shots because, they could. Despite its technical flaws, this is actually a pretty entertaining, inspirational sports film by Disney. We've gotten so many of these movies, but I feel like this one is a lot better, more memorable than some of the weaker ones. Though they're not my favorite movies, I still am a sucker for a good cheesy formulaic sports movie that involves a continuous failing and a final redemption. Though they're not the best, it's still worth checking out, especially in quarantine. It'll make you feel better. Then I saw Fruitvale Station, directed by Ryan Coogler. I'm gonna read straight from my Letterboxd review because I think that really sums up how I feel about this. That may have been the most I've ever cried during a movie. This is one of the most emotional films to ever be released. No joke. Michael B. Jordan gave pretty much a flawless performance as an everyday man. It hurts to watch those final 30 minutes. It really hurts. It's all that will really stick with you. The rest of the movie could drag just a little bit, but it did a nice job patiently building up to these horrific and tragic historical events. Moments I wish I could never have witnessed in my life. If you haven't seen this yet, I strongly recommend it. It's an extremely powerful yet quiet film that celebrates the human spirit, that makes you care about the character on screen until he's taken away from you. Man, I will never ever forget this film. I get the chills just thinking about it. I followed that up with a very different movie by the name of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I love this movie. I don't really have a reason not to give it 5 stars at all. It's hilarious, it's awesome, and Yeah, I got nothing else to say about it. I also checked out the 16-minute short called Validation. This is by all means experimental, and yes, it does feel a little bit cartoony, but it's enhanced by its black and white style and its charismatic performances. It's also very fast-paced, so it does feel a lot more fun to watch, despite the fact that the compliments that this guy gives are just very generic. This is a very short film, but it can still impact somebody and give them some sort of emotion. That's what I loved about it. It had a great idea and a great message. I then rewatched one of my favorite documentaries of all time, Won't You Be My Neighbor? This is just such a joyful movie experience. Every time I see this, there's just this undeniable energy and likability that splashes onto the screen. I can't exactly say when I cried, but I can say when I smiled. I smiled throughout the entire runtime. This film just speaks directly to me, and I suggest everyone to go check it out. Maybe it'll speak to you. It's really changed the way I looked at people. I followed that up with Moonlight, directed by Barry Jenkins. I didn't really want to give this a lower score because I would get some hate, but this movie does deserve the love that it gets. It really does. I don't think there's a single scene in here that should have been cut out. Barry Jenkins made one of the most personal movies I've ever seen on film. The ending did feel a little bit abrupt and honestly a little bit weak to me. Even though it was trying to convey meaning, I did feel a little bit underwhelmed, but this is still a surprisingly personal film. As a straight white young adult that came from a pretty healthy and happy childhood, it's surprising that a film like this with a character living the opposite life as me connected with me as much as it did. The mannerisms of our main character are so believable and so relatable. I gotta say though, Mahershala Ali is my favorite part of this. Also, for a movie as quiet and slow moving as this is, it's always insanely interesting. Jenkins uses silence as a tool, not a weakness. I don't think this is the most important or impactful movie I've ever seen, but it sure was better than Boyhood, so you know, that's something. I followed that up with A Quiet Place, directed by John Krasinski. It's one of my favorite movies of 2018 when it was initially released, and it still holds up. Maybe not as great on a rewatch, but I still love this movie. I just have to give it to them. This movie doesn't get a lot of credit for it, but it actually does have some really great sound design. It's actually masterfully crafted. Yeah, it's a great movie. I love this movie, especially revisiting now since John Krasinski was doing that SGN show. Made me want to see him act/direct again. You know, I think he did a fantastic job in this. The performances across the board are very fantastic. I really do love this film despite its pacing and writing flaws. I also checked out Donnie Darko, directed by Richard Kelly. While the ending got me very confused, it's really hard to wrap my mind around it, I still had a pretty good time with Donnie Darko. First off, Jake Gyllenhaal was fantastic in this movie. He freaked me out, but he was great. The entire cast across the board was great. Patrick Swayze, Drew Barrymore, even Seth Rogen had a really small role, but he was awesome in it. I didn't even realize that Catherine Ross was the psychiatrist in this movie until the very end. That ending was insane. I expected it to be, but it still blew me away. I don't love this movie to death. There are aspects that don't completely work with me, but I still find this entertaining. I was expecting a psychological and philosophical thriller with all these insane meanings, which I did get, but I expected it to be very boring. It wasn't boring at all. It was actually pretty funny when it needed to be. I also checked out Chicago, directed by Rob Marshall. I think Marshall is a good director. I liked Into the Woods quite a bit despite its negative reception, and Mary Poppins Returns was insanely forgettable, but still was a good time nonetheless. Chicago, on the other hand, is strange. I wish we got a lot more of Catherine Zeta-Jones in this movie. She was awesome in this. Renee Zellweger is a great actress, but her character wasn't the most interesting to follow. She was extremely unlikable. I also love John C. Reilly in this. He is such an underrated dramatic actor. He was the only good person in this movie. That's what I loved. And his storyline was absolutely heartbreaking. I do like how they build different characters that don't seem like they would be put in the spotlight at first. I really enjoy this narrative as well. I think it has a really great theme hidden in here. It's just really hard to see because they do a pretty poor job mixing the musical numbers and the actual narrative. This makes the pacing all over the place. For the most part, this is a very fast-paced and entertaining musical, but the musical numbers do bring some of the storylines to a halt and actually are very distracting. They just stay in the actual storyline for a lot longer because there's so many human things to explore. They just could have done a better job exploring this world because the world was pretty interesting. I followed that up with Troll 2. I didn't really know if I want to give this a grade or not because it's just so hilarious, but I gave it a score anyway. The best worst movie ever made. Also, check out the documentary about it. It's awesome. Anyway, moving on. I then saw the Magnificent 7 remake directed by Antoine Fuqua. Oh man, do I love this movie. This is one of my favorite casts I've seen assembled during this entire decade. This is a great example of just solid filmmaking. The script, the camera work, the cast, and the music, they're all on the same page and work together so well to make a fun and entertaining Western. One of the most underrated movies I've seen in the past decade, in my opinion. I also love how Fuqua made all the environments and costumes look lived in. Everything looks dirty and gritty. It makes for such a realistic and brutal style. These action scenes work very well too. They're very immersive. While it did have a lot of undeveloped characters left in the dirt, I still have to give it to them for pulling off this project that was wonderfully acted, beautifully shot, and brilliantly executed. Please go check this one out. It will really make your day. It's a great movie. I followed that up by rewatching one of my favorite comedies of all time, Hot Fuzz, directed by Edgar Wright. I don't have much else to say about this, besides...
Point Break or Bad Boys 2?
Which one do you think I prefer?
No, I mean, which one do you want to watch first?
I then rewatched National Treasure with my family because my family loves this movie. I actually love this movie quite a bit. It's so dumb, it's so stupid, yet it's so entertaining. I love how this is designed for families because adults can watch this movie and get excited because the action scenes are handled pretty well, while the kids can enjoy the very absurd plot and the funny, harmless characters. Oh, also Nicolas Cage is in this, so of course that bumps it up. I also got to see Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson. This is one of the best war films I've seen. It stands by Saving Private Ryan in 1917 as one of my favorite war films ever made. This is the best study of war I have seen in a very long time. A powerful and inspirational war film that never feels too preachy. I'm a sucker for a movie about protagonists that are just good people. We just don't see that in Hollywood a lot anymore, and so it was just a nice change of pace to see such a heroic main character. Go check this movie out sometime. I think it's really worth your time. I then finished things off with The Usual Suspects, directed by Bryan Singer. I already knew about the twist at the end, so that kind of ruined the experience for me, but the way that the twist was executed was wickedly smart. I love the way that this movie was translated to the screen. The cinematography was great, the way the shots were framed was so nice, and the camera movement keeps this movie consistently riveting. The score is also really awesome. It was fast, it was upbeat, and always kept the story moving along. This is a fantastically paced movie. I like the characters quite a bit though, even though everyone in it is a jerk. The acting, especially from Kevin Spacey, was perfectly on the same page as the script, and it was awesome. The dialogue is great, some of the best dialogue I've seen since Pulp Fiction or A Few Good Men. Really like this movie, but wouldn't say I loved it. The structure threw me off just a little bit. I gotta see it again sometime to really fully embrace what it is. And I think that does it for the day. Sorry this video is a little bit longer than usual, but I had a great time watching these movies nonetheless. Let me know what you've watched this month in the comments below and or your thoughts on what I've seen this month. Be safe everyone, this is Ethan Butler and I'm out.